Good morning, fellas. Happy Monday to you. Hope you're doing well. Hope you had a great weekend. It was an exciting weekend of worship here at Resurrection. I hope you were able to be part of it. If you're watching this video, it's likely because you missed our Saturday morning Bible study this past week. We looked at the 11th chapter of 2 Samuel, the infamous story of David and Bathsheba. Obviously, most of us have at least some understanding, inclination, or familiarity with this story. But I want to highlight a couple of the things that seemed to grab our attention as we were in the Word and talking about it this past week. The first thing off is David, as the king of Israel, the one whose role and responsibility it was to lead Israel out against her enemies in battle, to be the one who is modeling faithful dependence upon the Lord in all things, but especially in military conquest, decides to stay back and remain in the palace during the spring when kings go off to war. This king did not go off to war. And in doing so, he finds himself with lots of idle time on his hands. He finds himself not having the opportunity to live into the role that God has given him for leadership and for modeling what it looks like to be a godly leader. Instead, he's alone. He's probably bored, seemingly lonely. And so he finds himself in a situation where, in his loneliness, he spies Bathsheba, a beautiful woman, on her rooftop, bathing. And there's a number of stop signs that David blows through in the midst of this passage. I think the first stop sign was he could have gone off to war with his army and actually done what he was supposed to do. He could have seen Bathsheba on the roof and turned inside and gone in and actually taken his loneliness to the Lord or to one of his wives. Instead, he calls a servant to him, someone who's positionally he's above, to go and inquire about Bathsheba. And when he gets the report and hears that Bathsheba is the wife of Uriah and the daughter of Eliam, there's another major flashing stop sign that should have kept David halted in his tracks. But instead, despite the fact that Uriah was a close friend of David's, he was one of his mighty men. This was not a stranger. This was a name that David knew. This was a man that David cared about. And yet, David was so accustomed to being able to satisfy his physical longings and his sensual needs that instead he blew right through that stop sign and had his messengers go out and to take Bathsheba and brought her up to the palace. David sleeps with Bathsheba. She finds out soon that she's become pregnant. There's obviously an intervening time there between those two verses. And in that time, David does not confess or acknowledge his sin. When it becomes clear that his sin is going to become public, he has two options. He can confess. He could go before the Lord and go before Uriah and acknowledge his sin. Instead, he decides to conceal. And he tries to conceal first by bringing Uriah back from the battlefield and creating a circumstance for Uriah to sleep with Bathsheba in the hope that Uriah would mess up the math and conclude that it's his child instead of someone else's. Uriah's honor and his willingness to do what is right, his willingness to forego the pleasure of being with his wife, his willingness to continue to camp out because he feels at one in solidarity with his brothers at arms who are in the battlefield, prevents David's concealment from being successful. So David urges him to stay another day and gets him drunk and sends him home with a present, hoping that he can entice Uriah through repetition to fail and to fall. Where Uriah was strong the first time, David's hoping that his strength will give out and that Uriah will succumb. But again, Uriah's integrity and his honor holds firm. And so David sends Uriah back to the battle line with his death sentence in hand. It's amazing to see that Uriah brings to Joab the information that is to lead to his own demise. And so Joab does the very thing that his king, the king who's supposed to be the faithful representative of the God of Israel, Joab receives the commands to have Uriah essentially murdered in battle, to have him abandoned, to have the army pull back so that his life is taken. A ton we could talk about in terms of the ways in which distrust is being sown here among David's own leadership and rank and file. But the thing that was most striking to us, at least at our table, this final response that David has when he hears about the news, and he hears about not only Uriah dying, but a number of other soldiers that are killed alongside Uriah. David responds, "The sword devours one as well as another." The sword devours one as well as another. Certainly, this is the most callous, unfeeling, hard-hearted example that we've seen from David. The furthest that we've seen from him having the heart of a shepherd, him being a king that models the shepherd king. And then some things that would be fruitful and worth looking at. Psalm 32 does a great job of articulating David's sense of heaviness, the weight, the heaviness of sin that weighs upon his shoulders during this time. And obviously Psalm 51 is the psalm which corresponds to Nathan's confronting David and pointing to the infidelity and the treachery and the lies and the sin that's been behind all of this. So a ton going on, a ton more that we could talk about, a ton more that we did talk about. Hope you're doing well and hope to see you. We have just a few more weeks left. We've got this week, week 12, chapter 12 this week coming up. We're going to take next week off because of the men's retreat, and then just 2 or 3 more weeks after that. So it's been great having you here throughout the year. I hope that you're enjoying it. I want to encourage you to finish strong and see the end of the story out. It's pretty incredible how so much of this gets wrapped up. Not in a pretty bow, but it gets wrapped up nonetheless. So hope you're doing well. Let me know if I can serve you in any way, and have a great week. I'll talk to you soon. God bless. Bye-bye.